Have you ever been underestimated at work simply because of how you look? Imagine being a brilliant engineer, but your colleague doubts your every move, not based on your skills, but on your race. Stick around to see the jaw-dropping moment this black engineer silences all the skeptics and proves true expertise knows no color. In the pristine corridors of Meridian Tech Solutions, the morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across polished concrete floors. The air hummed with the quiet intensity of innovation, keyboards clicking, printers whirring, and the distant murmur of technical discussions. Among the sea of engineers in their casual button-downs and dark jeans, Maya Thompson moved with quiet confidence, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder as she navigated toward the Advanced Systems Wing. Maya had been at Meridian for 18 months, working diligently on embedded systems and microprocessor optimization. Yet, somehow, she remained invisible to many of her colleagues. Not because she was quiet, but because they simply didn't see her expertise. They saw her youth, her gender, her race, and made assumptions that had nothing to do with her MIT degree or her groundbreaking work on autonomous vehicle safety protocols. But when the senior engineering team gathered around the whiteboard that Tuesday morning, struggling with a critical firmware bottleneck that threatened their flagship product launch, Maya observed from her workstation. She watched as project lead Derek Martinez and senior engineer Brad Sullivan scratched their heads over cascading system failures, their voices growing increasingly frustrated. "The latency spikes are killing us," Brad muttered, running his hands through his graying hair. "We've tried everything: buffer optimization, thread prioritization, even hardware acceleration." Maya's fingers paused over her keyboard. Those weren't random failures. The pattern was clear. A classic race condition in the interrupt handling system, complicated by memory allocation conflicts during high-throughput operations. She'd solved similar issues during her internship at Tesla, but more importantly, she'd published a paper on this exact problem during her graduate research. What they didn't know was that Maya Thompson wasn't just another junior engineer. She was the author of 3 peer-reviewed publications on real-time systems optimization, and her thesis on predictive interrupt management had been cited over 200 times in academic circles. And with just one carefully crafted solution, she was about to prove that brilliance doesn't announce itself, it simply delivers results. Because sometimes the most profound expertise comes wrapped in the most underestimated packages. Before we dive deeper into Maya's incredible story, I need to ask you something. If this story of hidden talent overcoming doubt resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us share more stories of remarkable people proving their worth against all odds. And hey, rate this story from 1 to 10 in the comments. I read every single one. Now, have you ever witnessed someone's true capabilities completely shock a room? Share your experience below, because today's story might just change how you see the quiet genius sitting next to you at work. Maya Thompson had worked at Meridian Tech Solutions for 18 months, starting as a junior systems engineer fresh from her MIT master's program. Every morning at 7:30 a.m., she'd arrive with her worn leather laptop bag, settle into her corner workstation, and dive into the intricate world of embedded systems programming. While her colleagues grabbed coffee and discussed weekend plans, Maya reviewed technical specifications and tested code optimizations with methodical precision. The engineering floor buzzed with the energy of Silicon Valley's brightest minds, yet somehow Maya remained on the periphery. Senior engineers like Brad Sullivan walked by her desk as if she were part of the furniture, present but unremarkable. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was debugging systems they couldn't fix, but her insights were often attributed to collaborative team efforts rather than individual brilliance. But Maya watched. She always watched. She observed the technical discussions from afar, noting the gaps in logic, the overlooked solutions, the inefficient approaches that her colleagues pursued with confident determination. Her MIT training had taught her to see patterns others missed, to identify root causes while others chased symptoms. On that particular Tuesday morning, Maya heard something that made her blood quicken with recognition. The senior engineering team had gathered around the central whiteboard, their voices carrying across the open floor plan with increasing urgency. "The firmware crashes are getting worse," Derek Martinez announced, pointing to a complex diagram of system architecture. "We're seeing complete system lockups during high-load operations. The automotive client is
We
threatening
need to
to pull
focus on
their
streamlining the
contract
workflow.
if we
I
can't
agree. The
stabilize
current
this
process
by
has too
Friday."
many bottlenecks.
Perhaps we
Maya
can start
moved
by
closer,
automating some of the
her
repetitive
steps
tasks.
silent on the
We need to
polished
focus
concrete.
on streamlining the workflow.
Those technical
I agree. The current
specifications
process
weren't
has too many
foreign
bottlenecks.
territory to her.
Perhaps we can start by
They were her
automating some of the
native
repetitive
language.
tasks.
The symptoms they described matched perfectly with her graduate research on interrupt handling optimization in real-time systems. Brad Sullivan studied the whiteboard with furrowed concentration. "We've exhausted every conventional approach. Buffer size modifications, priority queue restructuring, even switching to different microcontroller architectures. Nothing's working." Without thinking, Maya stepped forward slightly. "Have you considered implementing predictive interrupt scheduling with dynamic memory pooling?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a conversational level. The room fell silent. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her, with expressions ranging from surprise to barely concealed condescension. Maya felt the familiar weight of being the only black woman in a room full of senior engineers. But she stood her ground, her technical training overriding her social discomfort. Brad's eyebrows raised with a mixture of amusement and dismissal. "That's pretty advanced stuff for someone working on basic embedded protocols," he said with a patronizing smile. "Maybe leave the complex system architecture to the senior team." But deep inside Maya, something had stirred. Not anger, but determination. She'd seen this dismissal before, and she knew exactly what came next. 2 hours later, the senior engineering team still lingered around the whiteboard, their voices growing sharper with each failed hypothesis. Maya remained at her workstation, but her attention was completely focused on their increasingly desperate brainstorming session. The Friday deadline loomed like a storm cloud, and their automotive client's contract, worth $12 million, hung in the balance. "Maybe we're approaching this wrong," Derek suggested, erasing another failed diagram. "What if the issue isn't in the interrupt handling, but in the data validation layer?" Brad shook his head emphatically. "We've been through the validation protocols 3 times. The crashes are definitely happening during memory allocation spikes when multiple processes compete for resources." Maya's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. They were circling around the solution without recognizing it, like pilots trying to land in fog when the runway was clearly marked. Her MIT thesis had addressed this exact scenario. Predictive interrupt scheduling, combined with dynamic memory pooling, could eliminate the race conditions they were describing. Without thinking, she stood up and approached the group again. "The crashes you're seeing typically occur when interrupt service routines exceed their allocated time slices during high-throughput operations," she said, her voice steady and professional. "If you implement a predictive scheduler that analyzes incoming data patterns and pre-allocates memory pools based on statistical models, you can eliminate the resource contention before it causes system instability." Dead silence. 14 pairs of eyes turned to her with expressions that ranged from surprise to outright skepticism. Brad's expression shifted to barely concealed irritation. "Look, Maya," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Systems architecture at this level requires years of experience with real-time optimization. This isn't something you learn from textbooks or basic programming courses. We're dealing with microsecond-level timing constraints and memory management that can literally make or break autonomous vehicle safety systems." Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment. This wasn't just professional dismissal anymore. This was willful ignorance wrapped in institutional arrogance. "I understand the complexity," she replied quietly. "I've actually published research on this specific problem during my graduate work at MIT." "Graduate work is theory," Brad continued, waving his hand dismissively. "This is real-world engineering where lives depend on getting it right the first time. Maybe focus on the embedded protocols you were assigned and let us handle the critical system architecture." The other engineers nodded in agreement, already turning their attention back to the whiteboard, as if Maya had never spoken. She felt the familiar sting of being dismissed not for the quality of her ideas, but for failing to fit their mental image of who could possess advanced technical expertise. Maya walked back to her desk, but this time something was different. The dismissal still stung, but underneath it burned something much more powerful. A quiet determination that had been building for 18 months. That wasn't just embarrassment she felt walking away from the whiteboard. That was righteous anger finally waking up, and it demanded action. In her modest apartment that evening, Maya sat at her small dining table with a worn portfolio spread before her. The cover bore the embossed MIT
We need to
seal,
focus on
and
streamlining the workflow.
inside,
I agree.
the pages
The current
were filled
process
with
has too many
technical
bottlenecks.
diagrams,
Perhaps we can start by
research
automating some of the
citations,
repetitive
and
tasks.
peer-review
We need to
comments
focus
from
on
some of the
streamlining the
world's
workflow.
leading
I
experts
agree.
in
The current
real-time
process has too
systems
many
engineering.
bottlenecks.
This
Perhaps we can start by
portfolio
automating some of the
represented
repetitive
4 years
tasks.
of groundbreaking research that had earned her recognition in academic circles she'd never bothered to mention at Meridian. On the first page, a letter from Dr. Elena Vasquez at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory praised Maya's revolutionary approach to predictive interrupt management in autonomous systems. The second page contained the abstract of her master's thesis, Dynamic Memory Pool, Allocation for Fault-Tolerant Real-Time Systems. Research that had been cited in over 200 subsequent papers and had directly influenced safety protocols in 3 major automotive manufacturers. Back then, this research was her language, her passion, her identity. Maya had been the youngest graduate student ever to present at the International Conference on Real-Time Computing Systems. Her thesis advisor had called her work the kind of paradigm shift that happens once in a generation. Tech giants like Tesla, Google, and Mercedes-Benz had competed to recruit her straight from MIT, but life had intervened in ways she'd never anticipated. Maya flipped to a photo tucked between the research pages, her younger brother Jerome in his hospital bed, smiling weakly but determinedly at the camera. His diagnosis with acute leukemia had come just weeks before her PhD program was set to begin. The choice hadn't been difficult. Family came first, always. Maya had deferred her doctoral studies, moved back to California to be near Jerome during his treatment, and taken the first stable engineering position she could find. The last time she'd touched this portfolio, she'd been preparing for job interviews while sitting beside Jerome's hospital bed. She'd accepted Meridian's offer not because it matched her qualifications, but because it offered the flexible schedule and comprehensive health insurance her family desperately needed. Jerome's successful bone marrow transplant had cost Maya her academic trajectory, but she'd never questioned the sacrifice for a moment. 18 months later, Jerome was in full remission, preparing to start his sophomore year at UC Berkeley. The crisis had passed, but Maya had settled into a professional identity far below her capabilities. She'd been so focused on being grateful for stable employment that she'd forgotten who she really was. Not just professionally, but intellectually. But tonight, sitting with her research spread across the table, Maya didn't feel nostalgic or regretful. She felt a familiar fire rekindling, the same intensity that had driven her to solve problems others considered impossible. This time, however, Maya wasn't going to cry over missed opportunities. She opened her laptop and began to work. "There it is," she whispered, pulling up the technical specifications from Meridian's failing system. The solution was always there, the Meridian offices were still cloaked in pre-dawn. Darkness, when Maya's keycard activated the main entrance at 5:47 a.m. The lobby's motion sensors triggered soft LED lighting as she walked across the marble floor, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. Security cameras tracked her movement, but there was no one to witness her arrival except the night cleaning crew finishing their rounds on the upper floors. Maya took the elevator to the 7th floor, her laptop bag containing not just her computer, but printed copies of her MIT research papers and a detailed technical solution she'd worked on until 3 a.m. The engineering wing was completely silent. No humming workstations, no discussions over coffee, just the quiet whir of server cooling fans and the occasional click of automated backup systems. She accessed the central development environment using her authorized credentials. But instead of working on her assigned embedded protocols, Maya began implementing something far more sophisticated. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, translating complex theoretical frameworks into elegant code. The predictive interrupt scheduler took shape line by line. Algorithms that analyzed historical data patterns, statistical models that anticipated memory allocation needs, and dynamic pooling mechanisms that eliminated resource contention before it could cause system failures. For 3 hours, Maya worked in complete concentration, implementing solutions that drew from her deepest technical expertise. She integrated her research on fault-tolerant systems with Meridian's existing architecture, creating a hybrid approach that maintained compatibility while dramatically improving performance. Every function was documented, every algorithm tested, every edge case anticipated and handled. When she finished, Maya ran comprehensive stress tests on the modified firmware. The results were undeniable. System stability improved by 94%. Memory utilization became 67% more efficient.
We need to
And the
focus on
dreaded
streamlining the
cascade
workflow.
failures
I
that
agree.
had
The
plagued
current
the
process
automotive
has too many
client
bottlenecks.
simply
Perhaps we can start by
disappeared.
automating
The
some of the
solution
repetitive
wasn't
tasks.
just functional.
We need to
It
focus
was
on
elegant,
streamlining the
robust,
I
and
agree.
scalable.
The current process has too
There
many
was
bottlenecks.
nothing else to
Perhaps
say.
we can start by
Maya
automating
saved
some
her
of the
work to
repetitive
the shared
tasks.
development repository, carefully documented her implementation methodology, and quietly left the building as the morning shift began arriving. At 9:15 a.m., Derek Martinez arrived at his workstation to find an automated notification in his email. Critical system updates committed to repository. Stability metrics available for review. He opened the development environment, expecting to see routine maintenance updates, but instead found something extraordinary. "Brad," he called across the engineering floor, "you need to see this immediately." Within minutes, 12 engineers stood around Derek's monitor, staring at performance metrics that seemed almost impossible. The system that had been failing, catastrophically, just 18 hours earlier, was now running with near-perfect stability and efficiency. "This could revolutionize our entire product line," whispered senior architect Linda Chen. The solution wasn't just effective, it was brilliant. Within an hour, the automotive client had been notified, and by noon, social media posts from Meridian's engineering team were going viral in tech circles. The investigation took less than 2 hours. Meridian's version control system tracked every code commit with timestamps, user credentials, and detailed change logs. When the senior engineering team pulled the repository history, there was no ambiguity about who had implemented the revolutionary solution that saved their flagship product. Maya Thompson, Derek read from his screen, his voice barely above a whisper. Code committed at 8:43 a.m. this morning. Implementation time, approximately 3 hours of continuous development. "That's impossible," Brad muttered, leaning over Derek's shoulder to examine the timestamps. "She's working on basic embedded protocols. There's no way she could understand the system architecture well enough to implement something this sophisticated." But the evidence was irrefutable. Maya's employee ID, her workstation access logs, and even security camera footage showing her arriving at the office before dawn. By 2 p.m., Derek had called an emergency meeting. Maya sat across from the senior engineering team in Conference Room B, the same portfolio from the previous evening now resting on the polished table between them. Through the glass walls, she could see her colleagues pretending not to stare while they worked at their desks. Word had spread quickly through the office. The quiet junior engineer had somehow solved a problem that had stumped the entire senior team. "You want to know who I am?" Maya said, her voice steady and professional. "So I'll tell you." She opened her portfolio to the first page and slid it across the table. Derek picked it up, his eyes widening as he read the MIT letterhead and Dr. Vasquez's commendation. Maya continued pulling out documents, peer-reviewed publications, conference presentations, academic recognition, and finally, her master's thesis. "My thesis focused on predictive interrupt management in real-time systems," she explained, as the senior engineers passed her research around the table. "The solution I implemented this morning was a direct application of research I conducted 3 years ago at MIT's AI lab. My work has been cited in over 200 subsequent papers and directly influenced safety protocols at Tesla, Mercedes-Benz, and Google's autonomous vehicle divisions." Brad held up a copy of Maya's published paper, his face pale with recognition. This is the Thompson predictive scheduling model. I referenced this paper during my own graduate research. You're that Maya Thompson?" Maya nodded quietly. "I didn't leave engineering when I graduated from MIT. Engineering never left me. I just had to walk away from academia because my brother needed me during his cancer treatment. I took this position because it offered the stability and health insurance my family needed during his bone marrow transplant." In that quiet conference room, they finally saw Maya Thompson not as a junior engineer who'd gotten lucky, but as one of the most brilliant systems architects of her generation. Someone who had been hiding in plain sight for 18 months. The next morning, Maya stepped into the Meridian Engineering Wing at her usual 7:30 a.m., but something was fundamentally different. Instead of the typical bustle of engineers grabbing coffee and discussing weekend plans, the floor fell into respectful silence as she walked to her workstation. Then, slowly, a wave of applause began near the senior workstations and rippled across the entire floor. "Maya!" called out Linda Chen, the senior architect who rarely acknowledged anyone below principal engineer level. "That solution you implemented, it's not just fixing our current problems. Our automotive client wants to license the technology for their entire fleet management system. You've potentially created a
We
new
need to focus on
revenue stream
streamlining the
worth
workflow.
$50
I
million
agree. The current process has
annually.
too many bottlenecks.
The applause
Perhaps we can start by
continued
automating
as
some of the
colleagues who had
repetitive
walked
tasks.
past her desk for 18 months now approached with handshakes, questions about her research, and invitations to technical discussions they'd never thought to include her in before. Maya accepted their recognition gracefully, but her focus remained on the larger implications of what had transpired. Later that afternoon, Maya was called to a meeting with Meridian's Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Sarah Kim, a woman she'd only seen in company newsletters and quarterly presentations. The executive conference room on the 20th floor offered panoramic views of Silicon Valley, but Maya's attention was focused on the offer being presented. "We're creating a new position for you," Dr. Kim announced, sliding a formal document across the mahogany table. "Principal Systems Architect, reporting directly to me, with a research and development budget of $2 million annually. You'll lead a team of 8 engineers focused on advanced real-time systems optimization." Maya scanned the job description and salary figure, both representing the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed of during her MIT days. But she had one non-negotiable condition. "I accept," she said, looking Dr. Kim directly in the eyes. "But I want to establish a mentorship program for underrepresented engineers, particularly those who might have brilliant ideas but lack the platform to share them. Too many people in this industry are overlooked because they don't fit the expected profile of genius." 2 weeks later, Maya stood before a packed auditorium at Meridian's quarterly technology symposium. The audience included not just Meridian employees, but representatives from major tech companies, academic researchers, and journalists from industry publications. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, many new, all focused on hearing from the engineer whose breakthrough had become a case study in recognizing hidden talent. Excellence doesn't always announce itself with credentials and self-promotion, Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. Sometimes the most transformative ideas come from people you've been walking past every day. People whose brilliance you didn't recognize because you weren't looking in the right places. The entire room stood in thunderous applause. But Maya's greatest satisfaction came from seeing the young engineers of color in the front rows, their faces bright with possibility and recognition. 6 months later, Maya Thompson's corner workstation had been replaced by a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a whiteboard covered in complex algorithms. But every morning at 7:30 a.m., she still arrived with the same worn leather laptop bag, and she made a point of walking through the engineering floor, stopping at workstations to chat with junior engineers about their projects and ideas. Her mentorship program had grown from a single initiative to a company-wide cultural shift. Meridian now actively sought diverse perspectives on technical challenges, and the company's innovation metrics had improved dramatically. Maya's predictive scheduling technology had been licensed to 12 major corporations, generating the revenue stream that funded her expanded research team. But perhaps, most importantly, Maya had learned to see her own worth through her achievements rather than others' recognition. The quiet confidence that had carried her through MIT and sustained her during family crisis had been refined into leadership that elevated everyone around her. Brad Sullivan, now one of Maya's most dedicated collaborators, had become an advocate for inclusive engineering practices throughout the tech industry. "I learned that expertise doesn't always look like what you expect," he told industry publications. "Maya taught me that the most dangerous assumption in engineering is thinking you can judge someone's capabilities by their appearance or position." Maya's story spread throughout Silicon Valley as a reminder that brilliance exists everywhere. You just have to be wise enough to recognize it. Sometimes the most profound expertise comes from the most underestimated sources, and true leadership means creating spaces where hidden genius can finally be seen.